So this is chapter 4, ethical guidelines for psychological research. So it's a little bit of a detour, but a very important one. After all, when we do research, whether it's with human beings or non-human animals, um, you're dealing with an ethical issue, right? Uh, People in particular deserve to be treated with kindness and respect and fairness. And the past has shown that researchers of various persuasions haven't always done so. So there's a very important ethical component to research. So let's look at a couple of those historical examples where we can certainly put question marks by how well the participants in the studies were treated. Let's talk about, and I assume that you've heard of both of these, but let's talk about them anyway. First, let's talk about what's often referred to as the Tuskegee syphilis study, which isn't a study in psychology, by the way, so possibly you haven't heard of it, but you have heard of the second experiment we'll talk about, the Milgram obedience studies. I assume that was part of your intro psych class. So first, the Tuskegee syphilis study. So this began in the 20s and 30s. At the time, syphilis was a very widespread disease, and it was at the time a dangerous disease. Um, right in the South, among black men, the textbook says that about 35% of black males were infected with syphilis. So this, on paper, certainly was not an unnecessary study. Right, studying syphilis at the time was very important. So in this study, 600 primarily poor, primarily black males were recruited from the community of Tuskegee in Alabama. 400 of whom had syphilis, 200 didn't. And the goal was to study the long-term consequences of syphilis. Now, at the time, the only treatments available for syphilis were toxic metals, right? So the treatment for this disease was potentially dangerous too, and potentially even fatal too. So it was sort of a rock and a hard place at the time when you had syphilis, whether you wanted to be treated or not. So participating in this study was for a lot of these people pretty good, because that meant that they could potentially get health care. So again, on paper, at the outset, this may have looked like an okay study to do. However, the researchers made a whole bunch of unethical choices. So participants, for instance, were not told that they had syphilis. In fact, there's little evidence that these guys were actually told that it was about studying syphilis. The people who tested positive were simply told that they had bad blood. At one point, the study involved a very painful spinal tap procedure, and the participants were invited to come to the clinic, where they were told it was a special free treatment rather than a procedure. So they were misled to believing that it was part of their treatment. Then early in the 40s, in 1943, penicillin became available, right? An antibiotic, cheaply made, cheaply administered, easily administered to treat infections. Penicillin is a fantastic drug. It's over time saved the lives of I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people. And it's certainly a treatment for syphilis. Now, the people who participated in the study weren't told about this, right? Despite it being widely available, they weren't offered this treatment. So this continued until 1972, when the press got hold of this study, published it widely, and the study got widely condemned, and it was put a stop to. So over time, as the study continued, lots of the participants involved, people got sicker, many people died, lots of people, inadvertently infected other people with the illness. It's a severe illness, among other things that can lead to birth defects, early dementia, death, and so on. Yeah, it's no fun, but very treatable these days, or at least after 1942. And it wasn't until the 90s, during the Clinton administration, that survivors of the study received an official apology from the US government. So what were the kind of ethical, um, or rather unethical, choices made by the researchers? First, of course, is that the participants were not treated respectfully. They weren't told about their illness. They weren't told about, when penicillin became available, about the treatment of their illness. So in other words, they weren't adequately informed about the costs and benefits to them of participating in the study. Secondly, the participants were harmed, right? Treatment was withheld from them, so they were harmed. They weren't told about their diagnosis, so many of them continued living with their families and potentially spreading this disease without them knowing. Thirdly, the researchers were targeting a disadvantaged social group. It means they targeted a specific group in that study, right? The vast majority of these people were poor and African American. Keep in mind, by the way, that illiteracy in that group at the time was fairly high. So a lot of these people didn't have the opportunity to read about penicillin themselves, right? Yeah, syphilis, of course, affects people from all social strata, especially in, Second World War. But so the fact that one group would have to bear the burden of this study, whereas other groups get the benefit of that, is also an unethical decision, right?